collection of poems locating Strongwoman. Thank you all for coming. My name is Valerie Brandis and I am the founder and publisher at Jacaranda Books. And I am proud to say that we are also Tolu's publisher and that Tolu's part of our big initiative for 20 in 2020, where we committed to publishing 20 Black British writers. I first met Tolu about 3 years ago at an event in East London, organised by Joy Francis and Digital Women, discussing how each of the panelists on this for this group of women define success. It was a great event for powerful women at various stages in their power. And I remember the session being turned over toward a very young woman at the time who was introduced as a poet, and her name was Tolu Agbolusi. I was blown away by the power and the emotional impact of her performance that night. And we had a brief conversation following where we arranged for her to meet at my office, and we talked about, the possibility, she was definitely looking for a publisher, the possibility of her being published by Jacaranda. At the time we did not publish poetry, and I really wanted to do right by her, and she would have been really our first book of poetry at that time, and I just didn't think we were in the right place at that time to do it for her. But within the next year or so, we were kind of at a crossroads in the business, and that's when we launched our 20 in 2020 initiative in 2018, where we were trying to find a way to see how we could position ourselves going forward. And as a result of that initiative, there was an opportunity for me then to think about publishing poetry and therefore making an offer to publish Tolu. So we began our journey in 2018 together. She's an amazing poet, playwright, author. She exists in so many different ways: educator, lawyer. She is known for her simplicity, she has incredible depth, and she has a compelling story and storytelling skills. She's been shortlisted for the 2018 White Review for Poetry Prize, and I know there are very many more accolades coming down the line for Tolu. She is one of our bright, shining stars in the poetry constellation, and we are really proud to be in part of her journey here at Jacaranda. So I will waste no more of your time, and I will just introduce you to the wonderful Tolu Agbolusi.
Thank you for that brilliant introduction. I also remember when we first met, I had planned to come and accost you, and then I realized you didn't do poetry. But we started speaking anyway, and I'm glad that we did. I feel that the best way to start tonight is with the first poem you ever heard me do, or at least a version of it. You heard it in its earlier version, and this is what it is now. Museum of Women for my mother. Praise for the mothers, their love like an expensive scrub, scraping away what is dead, what needs to die, soothing the afterburn. Praise for the sisters who show up without needing to ask what is wrong. Arms full of plantains, portable joy, who swathe your body before it can fall apart. Praise for the women who write books about women who challenge us to live beyond survival. For the girls whose stories incite renaissance. Praise for all the women who chorus groans when the truth is too heavy for words. Artists quietly molding, mending, retouching me into a masterpiece, even when I don't yet acknowledge I am still under construction. If I ever said I made it this far alone, I lied. My first guest this evening is going to be my editor, Jacob Sam Larose. Now, Jacob is a poet, an educator, an editor, my editor, community builder. He has been described as a one-man literary industry for good reason. And if you're on the London poetry scene, you know Jacob. But that notoriety is not why he is here or why I wanted him to be my editor. Jacob has always made time for me and for poets, young poets who are coming behind him to guide the way, to show, to share what he knows, and not begrudgingly and not for clout. So when it came to do my collection and the idea was in my head that Jacob was a possibility, I ran with that. And I'm glad that he said yes. So without further ado, I welcome Jacob Sam Larose.
Hello.
Hey, Jacob.
Hey.
Thank you for agreeing to have a little conversation with me tonight about our book. And the process of putting it together. So people always ask about editing and the editing process. So it's either they're asking how the whole thing works, or they're asking whether stuff just gets, spit onto paper and and that's it, which clearly it was not. So I guess my first question to you is, what is the process of putting a book together, or putting a poetry collection together, from the moment where you receive the manuscript to the moment where, for example, in my case, you send me an email with a few words to say, I'm going to want you to think about hands and the iconographic meaning of blah, 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 blah. And I get scared because we haven't started yet and he's asking me questions I can't answer. To the rest of the process, how does it work for you as an editor?
Yeah, so I mean, I won't go into a step-by-step, blow-by-blow as such, but some of the key points, really for me, it's kind of a sense of loading the work into my head, and trying to get a sense of what the work is saying, what the work is doing, trying to get a sense of the themes that are running through the body of work that I've been presented with. So in the case of this collection, yes, there were certain symbolic touchstones, the hands being one of them, as you referenced, mirrors, another one. There are these kind of elements that started to float through. So I started picking up on some of those and asking the questions about the significance of these elements. So again, for me, it's really important to establish a sense of what's actually going on here, what's at work, what is it that you're presenting that you are aware of, what is it that you're presenting that is very present in the work, but that you might not have consciously lent into, even as important as those elements may have been. Because, we do that as writers, right? There are these things that we touch on and that we come back to that we may not be so consciously aware of, or we may not even be aware of how important those things are to us, right? So as the outside eye, I get to ask you the question, okay, you see this thing that you're doing here and here and here and here as well. What's going on there? What's that about? What does that mean to you? And have you really, and this is like one of the really important questions for me, have you done what it is that you really wanted to do with that particular idea or that particular line of thinking or that particular image or that particular symbol, that particular theme that you're investing in? Yeah, so when we refer to mirrors in this collection, what do mirrors stand for? What do they represent? What do they allow you to do? And have you really exercised or explored that? Have you done that justice? Whatever it is you feel needs to be said about that, have you truly met that thinking? Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of questioning, just, as evidenced by what it was that I just said.
Yes.
There was a lot of, I used the word interrogation with love. Yes, there was a lot of...
there was a lot of interrogation with love, yes. And there were times when I decided, when you told me to do something, for example, the Frankly poem, the Sestino, when you told me to think about certain things to do with it several times, and I went back and I did it, and we'll come back and you say, almost there, but And I'll go again and I'll be thinking, but I thought we were done with this. And then when I finally thought we were both done with it, you said something like, this is the clearest and the best I've seen this poem. I thought there was a full stop. I was wrong. Have you considered a sestina? I was like, no, Jacob. No, Jacob, I am not doing that. I have 2 days to go to hand this damn thing in. It's not happening.
And yet,
But,
yeah.
so I want to ask, like with poems like that, where you see something. So with that poem, and for those who are wondering, it's called Frankly, I'm Running Out of Ways to Fight for You. It's one of the poems I am going to read tonight. Did you know from the start that you thought that would work as a sestina? Or were you also discovering as we went through the process?
With Frankly, yeah, it was a discovery as we worked through the process. And I'm really glad that you used that word, because so much of the work that we do, so much of the best work that we do is about discovery, right? I'm very much, both in my writing and my editing, I'm very much about this notion of allowing space for discovery. If you already know what it is that you're going to do, yeah, okay, cool, you got a plan, but it's so much more exciting for you yourself as the author of the work, for me as the editor, and for the reader, if there is this sense of something truly fought for and something that you've really arrived at that you didn't know you were going to carve out at the beginning of the process, but you find through the process. That's what the process is for, right? So yeah, with Frankly specifically, that was the notion of the form that came for that. The idea for that came as we worked through the process, and as we saw what it was becoming, and as we saw what the possibilities for that actually were. But there are ways in which, yeah, I will have incremental conversations about pieces of work. There are ways in which I will say, okay, we can push this another step, and then we push it and we see what's uncovered, and we say, okay, let's push it another step. there's more that we can do here. Yeah. This process is about growing things. It's about nurturing. It's about cultivating. But it's, you know, there are ways in which you can look to a body of work and say, right, do all of this now, and that's just that invites breakage. You know, it's not about breaking a thing. It's about growing it.
It's about growing the thing. What was, or were there any poems that you looked at the beginning and you thought, oh gosh, this is going to be work?
No. Different poems demanded different forms of attention. But no, there wasn't anything that I was like, no, or yo, this is going to be wicked hard. I mean, I could turn that question back on you in terms of either what was the most challenging transformation or edit, or bearing in mind the fact that there were a couple of poems that we perhaps shifted when we got a sense of the entirety of the collection and how the poems were speaking to each other. There were a few poems that we said, maybe that piece doesn't quite fit in the body of work as it's evolved. Are there any poems that you found really hard to let go of?
There were pieces of poems that I found very hard to let go of. For example, in Soldier Ants.
Yeah.
That was one that we kept coming back to, because you were like, something is not connecting in the end. And I think we got to a point where I was like, Jacob, what is not connecting for you? Because I think I've connected whatever is missing. And we kept going back and forth on it. But it was a good push, because when we got to the end, I remember the last piece of work that we did on that poem, I think I had asked you a question with the answer in it, something along the lines of, I missed out the Yoruba words, conversation with my mother, or things that my mother said towards the end. But I don't think it fits in anymore, because if it's going to fit in, then I'm going to have to do more work to add X and Y in. So am I right in thinking that? You said, yeah, except you want to do, and I was like, no, I'm not doing anything else.
There's a line that we shall not pass.
I'm done. So yeah, so that one. And I also struggled a bit. Clearly I struggled with Frankly, because I didn't sleep all of that night trying to get the second sestina out. The first Sestina took me a long time, but then I was like, I tried. I can tell Jacob I tried. But when I told Jacob I tried, he said, yeah, you did. And then I said, so we're going to move on to the next poem and then blah and blah. He said, no. So we came back and you were like full on speaking for 10, 15 minutes. And I was sat by my window going, but I just told him no. Why is Jacob still talking 10 minutes later about the Sestina that he's decided I'm going to do? So
and why? Because it was such a fantastic poem. I mean, it was there, right? You could see it. So from your perspective, you just put all this work into it. And it was a push, it was a challenge. You hadn't signed up to write a Sestina at the beginning of the process. And it came down as a challenge, and relatively late in the day of the process, right? Yeah. But the poem itself demanded that further investment, right? And again, I guess that was part of my role. That was part of my role in our relationship as editor and author. I had that kind of that outside perspective of, look, if you just push, just this one more push, this poem will arrive in a form that you will truly be proud of. And the work was done. And hats off to you.
And you. I mean, one thing I have to say about this whole process, because I mean, I've been at this for a little while as well, and had different people edit different things along the way. And one of the best things about the exchange between us on this book was, I was pushed way out of where I wanted to be sometimes, but I felt as though I owed it to myself to make the vision that you were describing of the poems happen, because you were also so invested in it. I mean, there was a point where you were saying some stuff,
I got
sequencing and stuff, and you asked me if I wanted to explain or if I wanted you, and I said, no, you take it away. And I remember going to grab some paper so that I could write down how you were explaining what my poems meant, because it was making a lot more sense to me than what I thought. So I want to thank you for taking that much time and that much effort to get into the work in that way. And I think I should also ask, I mean, poetry is for people. It doesn't matter what the focus is on, but it's clearly a focus on women. Was that ever something that you considered, was that a factor for you, or a bother in any way, that you're a dude who is here editing a poetry collection about women?
I'll say simply, it's a factor, yes. It's a bother, no. It's something that I would never take for granted. It's something that I would never assume that simply because I'm an editor, it is my right to be able to take on this kind of work. I have to approach every work, regardless of who it's for, with an appreciation of what that work is about and what the author's intent actually is, right? So yeah, for me, it's a privilege to be invited to take on and to have the kind of relationship that we had in producing this work. The space that I was able to partake in terms of supporting and challenging you, and that's really important to me. It's the dual notion of support and challenge from the perspective of the appreciation for the work, right? But yeah, regardless of whether I'm as you say, dude, thank you. Regardless of whether I'm a dude or whatever, yeah, I don't take it for granted that, I had this role or this position. I do acknowledge the significance of it, but no, it's definitely not a bother. It's an important thing, from my perspective, to be able to maintain some sense of appreciation for the work and to listen. So it's not, and that allows me to come back to something else you said. This work is very much your vision. I reflected back to you things that I was seeing from your work. So it was never about me telling you what your poems were about. It was about me offering an interpretation of what you'd written. And yeah, kind of sending that back to you so you could see it for yourself. Because when we are writing our own work, when we're in it, it's kind of like that forest for trees kind of trope, right? We don't necessarily see the work from all angles, and this is the joy of the editing relationship. The editor has this facility to offer you, again, and I know I've said this phrase a couple of times, the outside eye that you can then, as the author, benefit from and say, right, okay, cool. So from outside of this is what this looks like. Cool. Now I can use that thinking also to steer my own thinking around how I'm going to push this work forward. It's always, however, your vision. It's always your work. And I celebrate you for the work that you did in taking on some of those suggestions, some of those thoughts, for the fact that you were always driving the ship, for the fact that you were always clear on that sense of, yes, I want to push myself. Yes, I want to challenge myself. Yes, I want to be challenged, but also I know what this work is about. I know how important this work is to me, and I know I'm willing to work for this. I want to celebrate all of that. Yeah, sorry, that was a long spiel and ramble, but that was a very long answer to your question. I think I answered like I answered like one question that you asked, like 3 questions that you didn't ask there. But yeah, it was all you, basically. It was all you.
Appreciate it. I guess to round up, did you have a favorite poem by any chance?
It's a really interesting question to ask. It's a hard question to answer. It's kind of like being asked to, and these are not my children necessarily, but it's kind of akin to being asked that question, do you have a favorite child? It's like, no, of course, I love them all equally. I really do want to celebrate Before the Bomb Blast, though. The work that you did on, I mean, yeah, frankly as well, yeah, sure. Again, in celebration of the work that you put into that, but Before the Bomb Blast, the way that you pushed that piece, the way that you pushed yourself in approaching that piece, the way that you pushed yourself in, because that piece existed, it had life, right, before our conversations.
Yeah.
And it's hard to come back to a poem that you already have a deep relationship with a new editor who is saying like, okay, yeah, that's cool, but what about this? Have you thought about that? Let's have a conversation about form. And what happens if we look at this in this way? And for you to take that on and do that work, because again, I was asking the questions, but you were the person who was answering them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, you know, it wasn't just, hey, I'm going to do this thing that Jacob said. It's like, now I have to find a way to answer the question that Jacob has posed for me. And you did that work. And Before the Bomb Blast is a fantastic manifestation of how far you were willing to push yourself and your relationship with your own work to find meaningful answers to the questions that I put to you.
Thank you. We could talk for a lot longer, but I'm gonna wrap it up here.
For sure.
And just, I've thanked you, you know, in private, but in public, I want to say what you did here, the way you saw my work, the way you respected my voice, even when you were pushing me to go, you know, to the other side of it. I appreciate that, and I can't thank you enough. So thank you.
You're more than welcome. You're more than welcome. The process was an absolute joy. So yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll do my own drum roll. This is where audiences, you know, Jacob Sam Larose. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I am going to invite 4 of my poet sisters to share one of their poems each, so that it's a full celebration of womanhood and poetry and literature and diverse voices. My first poet guest tonight, performing poet guest tonight, is Fizzy Mazar. I first met her in November 2018. I was approached to coach the Poetry Slam team for Queen Mary's University for the University Slam competition, and she was leading the team. Since then, I mean, before then, she had accolades, but since then, she won the 2019 Bridport Poetry Prize. She won the Wells Festival of Literature, Young Poets Prize. She's a Roundhouse Poetry Collective alumni. The girl can write. I think I probably scared her a little bit during our sessions together because I was trying to get the scary out of her because her poem required it. And my technique required me to stand in front of her and scare her until she was scaring me. But it worked. So without much ado, I introduce to you Fizzy Mazar. Welcome.
Thank you for that. Like Tolu mentioned, we met 2 years ago. And when I think of Tolu, I think of the grace and generosity she extended towards us in, the back rooms of like the chapel at my university in that church in North London. And it's been so lovely to see some part of that grace and generosity turned back on her in the event of her book coming out. And I'm super honored that she's asked me to read at her launch. This poem is called Qurbani. Auntie prayed for sheep, but was gifted a daughter. She watches her grow with reproach, calls her home before Maghrib, threatens to send her to boarding school if she doesn't keep her head down or stay quiet, asks her if the boy at the bus stand a neighbor once saw her with, changes school when the uniform is too short for their likes. When she turns 21, Auntie starts looking for shepherds to herd her. She doesn't have to search for long. They've been hoarding gold for the wedding day since her birth. The last time Auntie called home, she gloats about her son-in-law 1 month into the marriage. How he asks her to dress in white. How he's taught her to bleed. How he keeps her safe within 4 walls. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Beautiful poetry, as always. My next guest tonight is Nana Orleans Amisa, who I met at Callaloo residency in 2016. I think we were the only 2 people from the UK on the residency, but the friendship came much later. She is an amazing poet, a creative strategist, a presenter. She's a working member of my Sanity support group. And she's one of the few people who I trust to give me honest opinions on poems and life. Currently working on her first collection too. Ladies and gentlemen, my sister, Nana Orleans Amisa.
Hello, everyone. Hadn't realized I was working so hard in the support group, but it's a pleasure to be asked to be part of Tolu's launch for her collection, which I'm extremely proud of. It's wonderful to see work that I first saw in 2016 come full circle, and also to be asked to read a poem. The poem I'm reading for you this evening is one called And On and On. My mother's line is full of hand-me-downs, overbearing parents, parents who don't always know their fathers, parents who die young or suddenly. Invariably, there is a woman carrying on. There's curly hair too, prized like the yellowing of blackness we like to show off, carefully speaking too much of what's in our blood, what we value, that letter that says, Her Majesty has been graciously pleased to appoint you as a member of the most excellent order of the British Empire. There are open secrets too. Women, pregnant young, no doubt beautiful, waiting to be married or holding their breath full of life, round with a man who's gone native, then dropped like rustling whispers and bargains. The grandchildren wear the family names, Dawson, Dennis, Nicholas, solid English names for seafarers who ship gold dust or flesh like ours, who have other families across the seas, and who bank allegiances until the water fails us all. My mother's line is Fanti women who bear 9 and 7, proud and resentful of mothering them alone. Before her womb breaks, my mother manages 2, and her husband's sons with whom she has a chafing bond. We make lists, and with our sharp tongues, bite others and ourselves. All the Nicholas children learn to ignore our own tenderness. Thank you.
That ended. Ooh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you much.
My next poet tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is Jamilia Wisdom Bako. I've known Jamilia for 8-9 years, I think now. She's a poet who often challenges my idea that I can write whenever she pulls out a so-called draft, which is very well formed. She knows how to write in a way that rips into your emotions. She's the founder of Writers and Scribes, an organization that uses art as a tool for change. And my very first, I think, paid workshop, was through Jamilia. Back in the early days of Writers and Scribes, before they started getting all the council contracts and stuff. But her growth over the years has been immense. And at some point, was that 2016, James? You'll say in a bit. She was in the first season of my poetry development program for young Black poets. And she's been a huge supporter of my work. So it's great to have her here tonight. Jamilia Wisdom Bako.
Thank you, Tolly. She's just coming with all of the untruths and some of the truths, but honestly, it has been a long journey of just seeing Tolly grow from strength to strength, and I am so honored to be here tonight. I've got my book here, so guys on YouTube, I hope you have yours. If you don't have yours, you should have it, you should get it. And if you have it already, you should buy one for a friend because Christmas is coming, praise God. So yeah, Tolly is so generous with her gifts, with her talents, with her personality. She's so much about community and about pushing me. I loved the interview with Jacob because I realized that somebody else was doing to her what she does to us. And that gives me so much joy, to be honest, because I have been at the hand of her challenges and it's made me a better poet, and I am so grateful. So I'm going to read this poem. It is called Grey Coats and Nokia Phones. Today, you beg to be finished with this era of childhood, finished with the shades of dull and the boys on push bikes. Outside your window this morning, you find an old cigarette in the inside pocket of your coat. Put it to your lips. Pretend your mother called you a different name. Whispered it into soil, grew a girl as rebellious as Japanese knotweed, spread widely, determined not to be cut, roots too thick to be plucked into pretty or passive or purity. But your stems are scattered into wind because you are wasteful and you cannot grow breasts. Even your womanhood is ignoring your calls, so you gasp into daylight, hoping your mouth will burst open a song to rid you of the awkwardness of waiting, watching, wanting to age fast, to feel seen by the boys on push bikes who gather like prayer meetings on Tuesday nights, even in the rain, who utter prophecies in new era hats on grime beats. Even they have learnt the necessity of a name change. You swallow hard, like Gemma, behind bike sheds. Take the shortcut down the alley in the dark. Because you are bad at making decisions, you find men who do not care that your age hasn't bloomed, who are puzzled at the fear in your brow as they chase what you hold between your legs as if you are woman. Don't make eye contact with the devil, though he stares, promising to grant wishes. Run. Don't tell him your name. Thank you.
Hey. Thank you. My next and last guest poet tonight is Kat Francois. Now I'm going way back again. Can't remember when I first met Kat, but it must also be 8-9 years ago. Kat has been a staple on the London poetry scene for a long time. She's also a poet, playwright, performer, youth work coordinator and director. She's also she was the first person, I believe, to win a televised poetry slam in the UK. And if she's ever comparing an event, you want to be there because her energy is half of the show. Right at the beginning of when I started to frequent and do shows and stuff, I can't remember where we were, but I got talking to Kat, and I had just done an event the week before where I had, I think, a 30-minute set, and I was telling her, and she said, "Oh, you have enough material for 30 minutes?" I said, "Yeah." And so she said, "Okay, maybe we'll test you out." And at that point, she used to do a show at the bottom of the Poetry Cafe, which had been running for a few years. So she tested me out. And that was one of my first paid shows in the beginning. And we later became friends. And I am so grateful that she has accepted to be here tonight. She, very much like Jacob, is somebody who has shepherded a lot of people through the poetry industry in the UK. So without further ado, I welcome Kat Francois.
Hello, hello, hello. All right, hello and good evening. It's wonderful, 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 wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me here, and congratulations, Tolu, on your collection. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing that you've achieved. And yes, it's been a long time that we've been friends, and it's been quite a journey, and I'm very proud to be here this evening. So I would really like to share a piece with you called Sun Enveloped Sky. I wish I could grow some wings and fly. Big, black, beautiful wings iridescent in the sunlight. I've dreamt to fly since a child, catch myself from thermals, rift along, shift along, fly strong, but sometimes the earth is too much for me. The hate, the bigotry, the misogyny. If I could spread myself wide, I would. Thick-breasted, thick-bellied and thick-thighed, thick layers of feathers face to the giant yellow orb. Launch myself off the nearest high-rise, fly high and just fly, little black girl. Let go of your earthly baggage and fly above the gum, carpeted concrete, cramped spaces filled with blunt souls, hiding inside from the outside, above the dull, sad, colorless buildings, above the stench of human misery, above commuters shuffling to jobs they hate, lovers they hate, journeys they hate, lives they hate, sleepwalking towards a self-fulfilling fate. Each step weighs me down. Gravity sits uncomfortably on tired soldiers, sinking, resisting feet into unyielding ground, heavy with worry, heavy with anxiety, hunting for money, nothing but a city rat scurrying in the dirt, searching for scraps, fake smile, fake laugh, fake happy, drowning to survive, no way to thrive. So dream of pointing my face upwards, kissing the rays like a long lost love, releasing melanin, loosening, stifling limbs until they relax like well-handled dough for dumplings, spreading my wings like a giant blanket, casting a shadow with my itchy feet, nothing to keep me grounded, weightless and free. Wish I could grow me some wings and fly, big, black, beautiful wings, iridescent in the sunlight. I have dreamt of flying since a child. Catch myself some thermal rays, rift along, shift along, fly strong. Sometimes the earth is too much for me. Black death by white hands, meant to be an authority. Black death by white hands, we are meant to call in moments of need. Wish I could swoop down, fearsome and rage and pluck young black men from the jaws of death right out of police custody. Because year after year, decade after decade, families still say no justice, no peace. Sometimes the earth is too much for me. Happy to see children go hungry, happy for the homeless to decorate the streets, happy for desperate refugees to drown at sea. Pollution's on the rise, but she chokes, we choke. She dies, we die. I've dreamt of dreaming since a child, stepping off the edge of a high rise, which cast a shadow over my younger life. But I will no longer be afraid of heights. Wish I could grow me some wings and fly, big, black, beautiful wings, iridescent in the sunlight. Rift along, shift along, face to the giant yellow orb. Rise high and just fly, little black girl. Let go of your earthly baggage and fly.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you so much. Like I said, people, energy. The next, well, no, not the next poet. I'm the next poet tonight. But I figure, you know, spend time writing this book, we should be able to talk about it. So I'm going to be talking about it with a good friend. But before I introduce her, I am also going to do a couple of poems, and then I will introduce Brugobi. We've spoken a bit about, frankly, I am running out of ways to fight for you. So I figure perhaps I should do that one now. If it wasn't him, it was someone like him. Promising luxury, spending your money for sport. He was no match for you. I affirmed your worth, tried. You preferred to dote on his blunders, as if you knew the love he promised was so unsteady, any critique was a threat to your dream of belonging. Is that why you couldn't leave? He held your heart with barbed wire, made you believe his barbs were a necessary test to prove you were worthy of him. He shuttled women to your bed, brandished their youth like a threat he knew would ignite your insecurities. Everyone but you could spot his lies easy. Only tarred section of a potholed highway, love, he said, squeezing your face between his hands, and you tried to forget, stupid, weak, the names he gave you. Aren't you tired? I held your trembling body in a park where once green leaves compliantly fell from their branches, a cycle of survival. Love yourself enough to walk away, I said, to survive him. But performing contentment to spite the other women was sport, winnable. Your whole self summoned as a formidable threat. If only you had the same audacity not to shrink for him, threaten his foothold. There were ways. I unpacked them, tried. A stack of compliments was all it took to deter you. One skewed spot to obscure your view. I refined your angle of sight, wanted to believe it was enough to dismantle the persona you clung to, which wasn't him. But you concocted lies to feign blindness to the reasons you shouldn't love him. As if he wasn't a bed of nails your love laid on Kenan. When his hurt stabbed your bones, I treated each wound until we broke your resolve to endure him. Crave external permission to acknowledge your own voice. I tried to revive your season of this is who I am, take it or leave it. And didn't we reminisce on days when you'd sport red hair, blue lips, and a bald head, daring men to spot the difference between their fantasies and the real you? When I tried to make you blend, it was you who said they had to learn to love only the you they met or leave. Those days when you believed you deserved more, when the thought of lonely was not a threat that made you surrender sense to the nearest ogling man, him. When you demanded your card and keys at the spot where you met him. I need to learn to love me, you said. A dormant threat until then. I believed for you. Why abrade the scar before it heals? Cleave yet again to him. I tried. Yeah. That poem is dedicated to all the friends who are always bailing their friends out of bad relationships. And to all the friends who seem committed to being in bad relationships. Things I can't say too. How do you ask to be crushed? To hold the weight of another on your chest till you can only breathe long and deep? How do you explain that your body must be forced to expel all its air to let go? That you are accustomed to leaning on solid things that break without warning? That you loved a man once and only knew this as truth the day your body leaned so fully into his chest, you could have been weightless. That you chased that feeling, the depth of that serenity, sometimes in a hot bath, where the heat holds on until you surrender. Sometimes under the weight of a fat man who doesn't love you, but has enough heft to force your body to let go. Ladies and gentlemen, for the conversation tonight, I'm going to introduce Brooke Obi to you. Brooke Obi is a woman who I met, a friend, a sister, who I met also at Callaloo in 2016. We kind of hit it off straight away. She is an award-winning writer of the Book of Addis. If you've never read it, go read it. She's a screenwriter, former managing director of Shadow and Act, entertainment journalist and critic. She has interviewed big people like Oprah Winfrey, Maya Angelou, Denzel Washington. She's one of the most supportive women I know. And I'm excited she said yes. I saw Mercy put, yay for the Callaloo crew somewhere in the comments. So yes, big up the Callaloo crew tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Brooke Obi.
Hi.
Hey.
I just want to start off by saying congratulations to you, Tolu. I'm so proud of you. This collection is gorgeous. And I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to have been at Callaloo with you when you were forming what became this amazing collection. And glad to talk to you about it. Thank you for asking me, because I was going to call you up anyway as soon as I finished to get all the answers. So if other people can learn from our conversation that I was going to have with you anyway, because I need to know how your brilliant mind works. So I'm thrilled that other people get to to hear a little bit more about this too. And what I would like to do is just kind of start from the beginning. So yes, if anybody doesn't have Locating Strongwoman yet, go get it. But I was struck first by the title, and then this picture, this Carrie Mae Weems photograph. And you know, there's also a titular poem in here as well. And so I'm wondering what came to you first. Was it the title? Was it the words in the poem? Or was it the inspiration from this photo?
It all kind of came differently. So I there's a body of work I do, which I house under the name Conversations with My Sisters, which I think the book kind of falls under as well. And for a long time, I thought that was going to be the title of the book. But whilst we were at Callaloo at some event, I'm not sure why it came at that time. Locating Strongwoman came to me then, and I noted it down. Some of the poems had existed years before 2016. In their first or second or third or 100th version. But once the title came, then the poems started to come together. Now for the Carrie Mae Weems picture, I hadn't yet imagined it as the cover of my book, but I was doing some session where you had to bring a picture of something, and I'd chosen a few pictures, and the cover was one of the pictures I had chosen. And I wrote the title poem from it. Not knowing or thinking that it linked in with the collection of poems that I was writing, but then later on, obviously, I thought it did because of the themes, the mother theme in particular. But when I was editing with Jacob, then I realized it wasn't just the mother theme. It was the mother theme. It was the whole thing with mirrors and reflections and the things we learn in the process of life along the way. So that was how that poem came about. And then I was speaking with Valerie about the cover, and I think that was probably earlier this year, about it would be nice to get this cover, but I don't know, this picture as a cover, but I don't even know if it's possible. And she goes, but that's what you want? I said, yeah. She said, well, we'll try to make it happen then. And so kudos to Jacaranda for doing all the work. And I know it was a lot of work to get rights to this picture to use as my cover, especially during COVID, because yeah, communication was a lot. But it came together in different ways, but it was very serendipitous in that way, because I think the year before, or a few months before the Jacaranda announcement that the book was being picked up as part of the 2020, I also won, I didn't win, but I was shortlisted for the White Review Poetry Prize. And out of my portfolio of poems, the one that they decided to print was the title poem for this. So everything just felt like it fell into place.
Love that. That's the way, that's how you know that all that confirmation, that's how you know you're on the right path. I love that. And so much of this collection is about Black women and girls and the expectations that are put on us, the silences, the strength that we face, the strength that we have in the face of oppression. And, but most importantly, I think there's kind of a deconstruction of this strong Black woman myth that is like international, which I really love. So why did you choose this theme to focus on in this collection?
I feel like there's been so much conversation about the trope of the strong Black women, and I'm good with that, because it's good to know what you don't want to be.
Yes.
But I also think it's good to talk about what you aspire to. So if we're deconstructing the trope, I figured it was also important to have a conversation about, well, what do we see as strength? How do we redefine it? But also looking back at my experiences and my interactions with different people, I started to note things which for me, I thought, well, that's a quiet, powerful kind of strength. which isn't what people will recognize because it's not the thing that is pomposetting and shouting on the stage. And I wanted to draw attention to those little things that we do so that we're not always looking out at somebody else who is doing some huge thing, so that we're able to see some of the things that we do that are strong. But also looking at the title, Strong Woman, the reason that I made it Strong Woman as one word instead of two was because the idea that somebody is strong all the time. One of my closest sisters, Ruth Wigley Shaw, who I was interviewing on my Strong Woman blog the other day, said something along the lines of, you don't always have to be a strong woman to be a strong woman. And it's that too. We have moments of strength. We have moments of something else, which is not necessarily weakness. But strength encompasses all of that. The vulnerability that we can have. And sometimes the fact that you don't show up at the fight was the power. The fact that you knew it's not my time to die, so I'm not going to go today. Like that strength of decision. I wanted to break down those things and just look at what are our lives when we're not performing, when we're not doing what we've been told is the thing to do if you're a good woman, whatever that is.
Yes, this idea of the good woman and these reflections that you were talking about earlier, so much of the socialization of Black girls comes from society, but also from our mothers. And who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be. And so there are a lot of characters in Locating Strong Woman that have complicated relationships with their mothers. We see admiration in Museum of Women, which you read first. And then we see it in Recipe Book as well. There's also, my mother says, our relationship feels official. It's all over the book. It's all throughout the book. So talk about how motherhood influenced your birthing of this collection.
I mean, I think it's impossible to talk about womanhood and stepping into womanhood without also looking at the mother-daughter relationship, for better or worse, because either you were trying to become them or you were trying to make sure you didn't become them, or it was a mixture of both and then you found yourself somewhere in between. I think it always matters because we're always mirroring something or acting against something. So it was important for me to look at different mother-daughter relationships in the book, but also to not be one note about it. Because if we look at the title poem again, for example, you start with this whole thing of the speaker not wanting to be anything like their mother, because and whenever they see their face, because everyone says they look like their mother, they crash all the mirrors. Then there's a little mental health issue, and that continues. But then you work your way till the end of the poem where the person looks in the mirror, which is where the cover comes in. The person looks in the mirror and their mother looks in the mirror and they see the reflection and they don't mind the reflection because now they realize, actually, my mother is a whole person too, with her own life, with her own thoughts, with her own dreams, who is also just trying to live. And for me, it was important to have that journey. Yes, we can butt heads, but if it is a loving relationship, and I say if because there are toxic mothers too, but if it is a loving relationship, then I owe it to myself, to try and find out who is the woman when she's not just being my mother or somebody's wife. So those things are important.
Right, exactly. So when we were at Oxford, your instructor was Vibe Francis. So she's a fantastic, amazing poet and professor here in America. So she's quoted twice in your collection and she's mentioned in the acknowledgement. So tell me about her influence on Locating Strong Woman.
Yeah, huge influence in the sense that that year at Callaloo, being surrounded by so many amazing poets, but none of whom wrote in the same way, I was pushed, to hear my own voice better. But also Vivi had this thing about, yes, I'm going to push you, but I'm going to, I respect your voice, but I'm going to push you. I'm going to tell you what's good, but I might also go and tell you to throw away your whole poem and start from the last line. The poem you've been working on for the last 3 years. But she did it in a way that I felt opened my eyes to poetry because of Callaloo. I came home and I was devouring craft books that had been sat on my shelf for years, which I found impenetrable. But something in what she did made me feel seen, gave me permission back to the validity of my voice. And so I wanted to pay homage to that, which is why she is quoted twice. And frankly, the poem "Frankly" is the poem where she read it and she goes, "You've got a very interesting way of saying things. I like that. That is a beautiful, and it's uniquely you. But you don't know when you say a good thing because you say a good thing and then you kill it with something else. So what I want you to do is to take that line, frankly, I'm running out of ways to fight for you, and start a new poem from there. Throw away the old thing. If it's meant to come to you, it will come to you by itself, but don't look at it." And I thought, how am I supposed to, especially because it was a poem that I'd been performing for years. So I also kind of knew it. How do I throw the whole thing away? And that was the night where all the Callaloo crew decided to go for a dinner. And Mercy, shout out to Mercy again. Mercy managed to get us all into a restaurant that had not yet opened to the public. And when we left the restaurant at sometime after midnight,
yes,
a little intoxicated, and got to our dorms, I started working on this poem. And between midnight or whatever and like 4 a.m, I had 3 or 4 back and forths with Vivi over this poem. And then the last email came around 4 a.m. She said, "Yeah, you're going to read in the morning. I want you to read this one." And I was like, okay, which was a big deal because not everybody gets to read at Callaloo, right? So yeah, she had a big influence on my work, and I respect her as a poetry teacher, and her work is brilliant.
absolutely. And we're going to get back to all of the women and the sisterhood that has influenced your work. But first, I want to talk about the consent, the idea of consent. It's been finally a conversation that's hit the international stage because of the Me Too movement. And you're exploring these ideas of consent in girlhood. In the poem, we all take risks stepping into thin air, and in adulthood with faking death to avoid sex is not extreme, which is one of my favorite poems. Talk about, what you wanted to get across about women and girls and consent.
I mean, I'll read the poem first and then I'll talk about it. Faking death to avoid sex is not extreme. Death is a mating ritual. The base of my wings hacked, a male seizing my body mid-flight. It's a vice. Spiny claspers from a dragon hunter who doesn't care that his iron hold gouges my eyes, pierces my head, splits my chitin. This is a death I can come back from. Only if I'm quick. Freeze mid-air, plunge to ground or vegetation, make a corpse of my body. Let the hunter hover, for as long as it will take him to believe I have perished, or at least that I cannot be coerced into being prey. Does it matter if I'm always escaping? If I can't let myself be carefree? Sister Damselfly changed the rules, colluded with evolution to turn her green stripes blue to mimic males, trick them away from harassment. It worked for a while. I may lose a limb in the fall, but if he seizes pursuit, do I not win? Is this not how we practice being strong? Breaking ourselves in pieces so we can choose the one fragment that stays whole. For me, in terms of consent for that poem and what I was trying to, I mean, that poem is about thanatosis in dragonflies, but it's about the dragonfly speaking to a human woman. And I remember reading about thanatosis in dragonflies and thinking at least when they drop down, then the man runs away. But how many stories have you heard where the woman just lies there because she can't go and the man doesn't care, you know? And it's that whole idea that there's also the poem Strongwoman. There's that whole idea of sometimes you can use your voice in every other part of life and be seen as a strong woman who doesn't take, you know, any mess from anybody. But then you get into those situations and suddenly you're speaking, but your voice doesn't matter. Or you can't speak because your head is weighing up all your safety options and your safest options might just be to take it. And I wanted to explore those things and what it means to be strong in those settings. In the other poem you mentioned, we all take risks stepping into thin air. I remember a friend of mine, Genevieve, posted it on her YouTube or Twitter or something, Twitter or Instagram a couple of weeks ago. And there were some comments that, oh, I love it. You don't even wait and have a conversation with this man. You just lock your door and make sure that he doesn't come in. And we laughed about it and it was funny because it is a, you know, I don't want to speak to you. But what is also there is the fear. Because in that poem, for those who don't know the poem I'm talking about, it's we all take risks stepping into thin air. There's a part of it that says, I'll read it quickly, short. My first night in Cayenne, I slept with a man I met at the airport, another teacher. His bed, a hair's breadth from my misgivings, his only preoccupations were sleep and cheap accommodation. When he moved on, the bartender floated a drink to my room, cracked a joke, poured his tongue into my mouth, promised to return at 1 a.m., said I would discover him. Because I believed him, I barricaded the door, snuffed out the lights, and lay still until he tired of knocking. So yeah, of course, it's this is what I was referring to earlier when I said sometimes your strength or your power is the fact that you don't go to the battleground. Because in that poem, the speaker knows if I open the door, then that's it. My voice is not going to mean anything. And he's already shown me a bit of that. So let me stay away altogether. And I feel like these consent conversations are not always straightforward. So I wanted to explore all the non-straightforwardness of it. So yeah.
Oof, beautiful. So another one that you've talked about a little bit earlier is also not as straightforward, very, very complicated, and one of the most beautiful poems in the collection, When the Bomb Blasts. You know, it's terrifying. It's, you know, a suicide bomber explores the ideas of agency and silence and how do we speak the silence. So, you know, can you talk a little bit more about this piece and what inspired you to write this piece from this perspective?
When the Baga massacres happened in 2015, there were lots of stories about this particular young girl who wore the suicide vest and went, and people were calling her all kinds of things. And yes, people died, so I can see why that was. But what I was also thinking was she probably doesn't even know the meaning of the word suicide bomber. She probably didn't know what she was going there to do. And I just started to think about all the nameless young girls who get caught up in things that are not of their own making. But also that thing about agency in the poem with regards to, you know, she's a tomboy. She just wants to jump on the trees, and here's her dad giving her this pink, you know, really girly purse. And she's like, no, I want to jump on trees. I don't want the pink purse. And she's walking back through this carnage thinking, maybe if I said yes to my dad, I wouldn't have been so enamored by the colored purse that the uncles brought, which ended up being the thing that held the suicide bomb. Now, obviously, I'm imagining a story in my head for who this young girl could have been, and I'm giving her a conversation to walk back through. But yeah, life isn't black and white. So I feel like part of what I do in my writing is to make people consider, you know, other perspectives of what was and what could have been.
Absolutely. And so, you know, this poem is not just incredible for the language that you've chosen, but also the structure of the poem as well. I mean, it's scattered like a suicide bomber might be. And so you structure each of these poems differently as well. And, you know, depending on the theme, depending on what you're trying to bring out. And it's also, all the poems are grouped into 3 sections. So talk about how you structured, how you decided to structure the poems and also the collection as a whole.
I guess I listened to the poem and see how it wants to be arranged. And I try to be very intentional about every decision I make in terms of placement and spaces. But on Before the Bomb Blast, it was a usual, you know, block and stanzas. It wasn't as separated as such. This is part of what Jacob was saying before in terms of structure, because he came back. Well, actually, he came. I thought I had done what he asked me to do, and then he came back with some examples without telling me which poem in the whole book he brought these examples for. And he sent an email to say, I want you to guess which poem this is for. And I thought they're about 30-something poems. But I kind of figured it out quickly that he probably meant this one. And it's really hard for me to write it as disjointed as it felt for something that was already a block. But I kept trying, and the more I tried, the more I realized why that worked for this, in the sense of the explosion, but also in the sense that she was trying to figure out who she was as a girl. And the sequencing of the whole thing also works in pretty much the same way, trying to figure out what speaks to what in the poems. But yeah.
I love that. So I think another way that you show the strength of Black women is showing the defiance. There are a lot of lines in this collection that are very defiant, which I love. I built a whole city from words and put it on stage like I told you I would. That I underline that so many times, like the power of your words. Like, I love that. Not just the character, but you specifically have done that. And also in Cinto, I will skip without your rope. Since you say I should not, I will create my own. So talk about the obstacles, the doubts, the limitations, other people's limitations that may have been put onto you, that may have inspired these lines.
I mean, so like you, I studied law, right? And I practice. I still practice law. So stepping into the arts as an other career was not something that I had been in for a long time, so that I would have some of the scaffolding that I see that other people have. So certain things were more difficult. to get. But looking at some of the people around me who still believed in my voice, Francois, who was speaking earlier when I wanted to do the my Home Is project, who was gracious enough to come on to get involved, to advise, to suggest, you know, names of people for stuff. I mean, for me, there have been great people like that. Jacob, when I was thinking about touring as well, I remember speaking to Jacob and he was saying, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So I've had some good people that I can go to, but I've also had people who have given me either nothing or crumbs, and I'm not entitled to anything from anyone. So if you give me crumbs, I'll still say thank you because it all adds up, right? But I guess some of those things spur me on in the sense of, you know, people being surprised after they had, for example, after somebody has refused to write me a recommendation for funding or something, when they're then surprised that I was still successful with the funding application, or when you say you're going to do a play, you're going to do this, and somebody says, "Oh, isn't that too ambitious? Why don't you start small?" And then you do it and it's successful, and there's a begrudging congratulations or whatever. I'm like, congratulations, I take it. So all of those things for me are impetus to do better. Whoever is underestimating me, that's on them. And I remember interviewing one of my friends, Ruth, who I mentioned earlier, and she said, "Oh, something about you is that you've always just done what you wanted to do, regardless of whatever anyone else is saying." And I didn't feel it that way at the time. But I also feel like being somebody who's always on the borders of things has meant that I've along the way developed the attitude of, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm going to work at it and I'm going to do it. And it's not like you were going to like it anyway. So I can't rely on that as the thing that pushes me forward. That poem you mentioned, Cento, is a cento. So it's a collection of borrowed words from lots of other poets, which I have put in a particular order. I'm going to read it because it is also the first one that came to mind when you mentioned defiance. The epigraph says, "Here there is no place that doesn't see you," and it's by Raina Maria Rilke. "You are confronted with yourself each year, eyes like ripening fruit. The 38th year of my life, I had not expected to be an ordinary woman, plain as bread. Silence arrives like a servant to tidy things up. I had expected more. Such days when the sun's in a drawer and the drawer is locked. I have forgotten the why of everything. I sense an indifference larger than anything. I had expected more than this. I offer no apology. I will skip without your rope. Since you say I should not, I will create my own."
Yes. Love that. And so, you know, speaking of all of the, going back to the sisterhood, speaking of all of the Black women who have influenced this work, that's something that I really enjoyed about this collection was it is more than our trauma and our pain. There's so much joy that you put in here as well. The joy of that sisterhood. You know, you quote Lucille Clifton, the feast of women, the feeding and being fed. In the poem Ezekiel 37, you say, "If I'm lucky, a sister will smile arms around me on my commute, hold my gaze long enough to make sure I feel seen." And that's just what we do. That's just what we do for each other, whether it's a stranger on the street or somebody that, you know, we've been trying to get out of a bad relationship or whatever the case may be, you know, holding each other down. So I love that so much. So talk a little bit more about, I know you've talked about Museum of Women. Talk a little bit more about the sisterhood that enabled you to create this collection.
I mean, I'm surrounded by great women. tonight is a testament of that, to that. But then there's also my mother who keeps teaching me how to be and how to be strong. And I have great friends who have grown with me, you know. So we've grown through the periods where we were cool and then we weren't cool and then we're cool again. But, you know, now as older women, we're able to sit back and reflect. And it's that thing about being able to be with and around people, be in community with people that you can be honest with. So whether it's an editing relationship in a poetry community or it's a real friendship, I say real friendship as in divorced from the artistic stuff, although obviously they collide a lot. The importance is just people who see you as you are. In many ways, for me, strength in the way that I've tried to embody it, or that I try and look at it in my own life, is when you know who you are, when you know all of who you are and you accept, okay, these are the things that are a little bit shady about me, but I know them already. So it's not like you're coming to tell me. But once you know all of yourself, once you accept all of yourself, for me, that's strength. And when you're with people who are able to see you and accept all of you, that level of sisterhood is something that feeds. I mean, Jamelia, for example, is the person most likely to leave a voicemail with a prayer in it at a random moment. And they're always welcome. And they're always welcome. But whether it's that or like the poem Ezekiel 37 says about holding on to your sisters, you know, the prayer bit that is at the end, you know, if you're bones right now, you won't walk alone until you're good enough to come to. You won't walk alone. So yeah, the whole book is homage to that. I understand people have been putting questions in the chat box on the YouTube. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. Yes, Brooke.
Okay, well, yeah, we can wrap it up with this last question so you can get to the questions from the audience. What is your hope for this collection now that it's out in the world? What do you hope for the reader and what do you hope for yourself?
Ooh, that's a big. What I hope for the book, I hope that in the way that it has been doing, that it will keep getting into people's hands and making them and connecting. I hope that in whatever way it connects with people, that it does its job in reminding people that they have the permission to be who they want to be, and to reconstruct what they see as strength and to allow themselves to be vulnerable. Yeah, that's what I hope for the book. What do I hope for myself? Ooh, big things. We're just gonna have to wait and see what, but big things. Yes.
I'm expecting that for you too. All right, I love you. I'm so happy for you. Congratulations again. I'll let you get to your audience questions.
Thank you. Right. Somebody is assisting me with questions. Okay, there's a question that says, aside from other poets, who else informed or influenced the coming together of the book? Aside from other poets. I mean, it's largely other poets. I mean, the books I read, of course, poetry communities that I'm in. So I mentioned Home Session, season 1, season 2. All of you, I love you. Thank you. Callaloo, of course. Malaka's Poetry Kitchen. You know, these are all places where I learned stuff that all contributed to the book. And then life. Everybody I meet and every situation I'm in, I take something from and I try to observe it and see what comes together. If Locating Strongwoman had a soundtrack, 2 artists who would be part of it: Emily Sandé and Jill Scott. Third question, I mentioned defiance, especially as somebody coming into poetry from the outside. Reflecting on your journey, what are your tips on remaining defiant and true to your voice or story? I think you've got to read a lot of poetry, and you've got to, read a lot of poetry, go to good workshops, have a good community around you of people who are able to critique you honestly, not just blow steam up your, but who are able to critique you honestly. All of those things help you grow, because I always say when people are in workshops with me, especially people who do the longer workshops, it's not just about you thinking, well, this is good, so that's it. Why do you think it's good? On what is your standard for that? So you need to build yourself and be honest with yourself, of course, build yourself up to a good enough level, which hopefully keeps improving, so that you're also able to critique yourself and to accept critique and to be able to give it back. So I would say, if you want to be a poet, you've got to read. If you want to be a playwright, you got to read plays. If you want to be a poet, you got to read poems. All those things that people bigger than me have said before. And the more you do it, the more you figure out what your voice is. I can't remember who it was who said, your genius will reveal itself in your inability to copy properly. And I think that is good advice. Find good things, copy them, or template them. When I say copy, see what versions you can do, and then your voice will come through at some point and you'll know it, because you start to notice the tells. I think that was the last question. The last question is, do I have a favorite poem in the collection and why? So Jacob helped answer this earlier. This is like asking me to choose from one of my from one of my children. I don't have a favorite. It depends on the day, the moment. So for tonight, picking something that I have already read, I'll say the things I can't say too, because it's a poem that I had been trying to write for a very long time. And when it finally came together, I was surprised that it did in the way that it did. So I believe that is the last question. Gems, am I right? Great. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I'm going to do one last poem, and then me and the good people who were gracious enough to join me tonight will have a bow out. This poem is called I Found Home. I found home. I met a man who could have been any man, only he wasn't. What kind of absurdity makes one want to spend time learning an obscure language? He became fluent in me for the sake of it, invested enough time to decipher my laughter dialects, pure release, stuttered in warning, muddied with questions, or cluttered with doubt. He studied every detail, convinced he was reviving a city we could call home. Came alive, accumulating vocabulary, connecting them like puzzle patterns. When he said, "You are beautiful," it was deeper than high cheekbones, curved hips, soft moans, or compliments issued as one part of a bargain. If an acerbic tone caused him to stumble or consider walking away, he never did, not really. How could he leave a home he worked so hard to restore? Questioning this and contemplating that, he stripped me down, clothes, self-doubt, labels I held too close that weren't mine. At first, I fought the probing, the attention. I wasn't used to it. Didn't ask why he thought I was worth it. couldn't challenge his conviction, didn't want to. How could I throw a brick through the walls we had restored together when I'd begun to believe? When at last I understood that being my own woman is a house I must build from scratch, must choose every brick, must reject most donations for, I started with what I knew. One morning, when a full moon tinted the ocean silver white, we marveled at its splendor. I caught him gazing at my face with the same awe. This isn't about him. But the way he loved me with no remorse was impressive. I wanted to love myself like that. I gave up the craft of business for its own sake, courted silence until I wasn't afraid to be still, to stare at my own face, my own body beyond skin, and be confronted with shame I'd accepted without question. All the things they said a real woman was that I wasn't. The shame I owned for wanting to opine without apology, though not for empty attention. To love my own deep voice, the roundness in my face that no diet would shed. When the borrowed and donated things were as tangible as a false wall, I pulled them down. I now know where the floorboards creak, which doors are not good for access, which jarring paint I refuse to change, what it feels like to be at peace with myself, all of myself. Thank you. I'm gonna end the night first by thanking my mama and my papa, who I believe both are online somewhere tonight. Thank you both for the support, even when you haven't understood what I was doing. And I also wanna thank Peter Khan, who was online earlier, but I think he's had to go off because he had to teach, for being supportive over the years, but also for writing such a beautiful endorsement for my book, and for Vangi Gansho for being, for also writing an endorsement, but also being a voice that I can trust when I'm not sure about what my poetry is doing. So many people to thank, but those will do for now. I'm gonna ask everybody to switch their cameras on. I want to say thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you to Nana, to Jamelia Wisdom, to Brooke Obi, to Fizzy Mazar, Valerie Brands, Jacob Sam Larose, and the chef, the beautiful chef, Kat Francois. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I guess, good night.